talked briefly yesterday about the Nice beheadings and the dismal press response to it. And today, Monsieur Macron, President of France, his Minister of the Interior has come out saying that there will be 14,000 French troops now on the streets of France. So up from 3,000 to 7,000, now 14,000 on the streets of France to, quote, safeguard security in the land. No, it won't. It won't do any such thing. There are 65,000 schools in France that can be a target. There are 45,000 Catholic churches in France that can be a target. There are over 20,000 Catholic priests to be a target in France. This is not going to defend anyone. It can't. The main effect will probably be to demoralize French troops by forcing them to stand around waiting for the enemy, in the meantime being a target. Macron, in this regard, he epitomizes the kind of semi-psychopathic shell character that rises so well in big state welfare democracies. He's not putting troops on the streets of France in order to protect French people. He's putting troops on the streets of France in order to window dress his attempt to persuade French people that he is protecting French people. And his real response, the meat of his response, came in the interview he did with Al Jazeera last night. Now, the last place you should be going after you've had Muslims beheading Christians in a Catholic church, probably during a service, and then after which you have then had some very triumphalist Muslim demonstrations against France, not against the violence that Muslims did in France, but against France, including a triumphalist demo outside the French embassy in London. And what he said was typical of the crawling, self-serving politician. He went on to Al Jazeera in order to surrender. There's no other reason for him to go on Al Jazeera at that time. He did it, and what he said was that he, I quote, "I understand the sentiments being expressed and I respect them." He understands and respects those sentiments being expressed. Maybe I doubt he meant these sentiments that were being expressed by the Muslim on the inside of the Basilica of Nice, but you never know. And he went on to say, "Today in the world there are people who distort Islam, and in the name of the religion that they claim to defend, they kill, they slaughter." Now, this is the usual politician begging for a compromise and lacing it with a load of flattery that fooled no one in the beginning and certainly doesn't now. In reality, to be fair to him, there probably isn't. There's nothing that he can do to stop this kind of violence and intimidation, short of repatriating France's Muslim population out of France. When you've got such a large, hive-minded enemy in you and amongst you and around you, you can't defend. There's no realistic way to defend against that. The only possible means of defense would be attack, and it's difficult to see what kind of attack he could launch. Now, I know there'll be some macho comments in the comment section below. If you discount some of the political inhibitions, international treaties, the lack of political will or political cowardice, human rights courts, the possibility of foreign intervention, and political clientism towards Muslim bloc votes, and the careers and money that flow from pandering to self-appointed community leaders, what attack could he make? Reprisals, if they're not strong enough, they provoke, they backfire, they just create more of what you're trying to prevent. So, and also you have to do them against a wide enough population. You couldn't just do them against the Muslim population of Nice. But otherwise, the Muslim population of Paris or Bordeaux, they would come out and commit more beheadings in protest. You would have to do it against, I think you'd have to do it against the entire Muslim population of France, and you couldn't be gentle about it. Fines and curfews, blanket curfews as punishment wouldn't be enough. What if they don't pay the fine, if they don't obey the curfew? What do you do next? Reprisals only provoke if they are not harsh enough. They only work if they are harsh, and if your enemy is a bit demoralized, and if they to a certain extent accept your authority. That is why beheadings are working against us in our demoralized, degenerate polity, the system that we're currently under, the political system that operates. It's demoralized and decadent is the word, and that doesn't apply to Muslims, in that they are very hive-minded and they have a cheap attitude to life, which sees fanaticism and the death that flows from fanaticism as a virtue. So it's very difficult to see how how the most severe methods could work. I mean, how far are you prepared to go? Do you take one life per beheading, 10 lives or 50 lives? Do you go to 100 lives, the way the Germans tried to do in France during the occupation? What is really going on here is this is an example of what happens. This is an illustration, a slow motion illustration of what happens when you make the wrong moral choice at the start. When you go down a moral road, it becomes impossibly hard and daunting to go back, to turn back, and it then becomes going forward becomes more difficult. You have to do more and more and more of the thing you shouldn't be doing just to keep going forward. And this applies to all kinds of things. Pretty much any wrong moral choice: drugs, violence, money printing, dishonesty. And my view is that with Monsieur Macron, if there is something he won't do for power, then I don't know what it is. Now, with us in Britain, we shouldn't get too smug about it. I think it began, we made the wrong choice. We went down the wrong road in the 1980s. 35, 40 years ago. I think it probably started with the Brixton riots, when we didn't suppress them vigorously enough in 1981, or the suspension of Ray Hunniford, the headmaster in Bradford who spoke out against multiculturalism, I think in 1982, and he was suspended in 1985, or the death threat, the death sentence on Salman Rushdie in 1988. Anyway, too long ago for our system to be able to turn back. So effectively, we're in the same boat as France, albeit we might be in a slightly drier cabin, but we're in the same boat as them. And we have been here before. There is nothing new under the sun in this regard. Denmark, in 2005, published its own cartoons, and there was a storm of whipped up protest in the Muslim world. You probably read about it. And now the Danish New Right Party wants to take out an advert in the Jyllands-Posten, the newspaper which published those cartoons, and that the New Right Party wants to publish those cartoons in the same newspaper via an advert, a full-page advert. And the Jyllands-Posten newspaper has come back and said, no, we're not going to do it. And their response is worth reading. They said, we use all parts of our right to cover and comment on acts that vandalise our democracies. Only in one place do we have a caution that is in fact a censorship inflicted on us by threats. We do not show drawings of the Prophet Muhammad, reads the editor-in-chief. I wish it was different, that we could express ourselves freely as we do in other matters. But violence works. That's the message here. That's the carry home, and that's the takeaway. And that is Macron's aim. Macron's aim is to get France into that position without appearing to. He wants to appear tough and macho, but he wants to get into a position of surrender and subjugation. It is in his interest. It is good for his power, the power of his political class. It takes away French identity. It keeps French people in fear through the threat of violence, and it diminishes the self-confidence and self-reliance that freedom tends to ingrain and inculcate. That's his aim, that's his objective. I would expect it to be systematized through some kind of phony religious consultation committee, combined with very generous handouts towards self-appointed community leaders in France. Now, France is learning that violence works. I wonder who is going to be next. I think we in England are as good a candidate as any, and I would expect our politicians to cave in a lot faster and a lot more nakedly than Macron is doing. In the meantime, I intend to do my bit to hold the line by doing something effective, by stopping those mosques from getting built.